Hey everyone, welcome to the Tom's Hardware Show. I'm Jared Walton and I'm here with Andrew Friedman. We are talking today about the new Asus Zenbook S13. Andrew, how are you doing?
Doing all right. How are you?
Doing good. I don't have any embargoes right now, except
Well,
except I
now
I've
that
got things to get done.
now that every company on the planet has announced their new laptops, or their, I think we're hopefully in a little bit of a better place.
Yeah, you'll have a downtime until the fall when all the new
Oh,
laptops come out again.
oh no, they're coming out now. The ones from CES are just showing up now because of all of the backlogs that they had
Oh,
in their factories.
but won't they announce new ones in the fall as well, like
Who
back
the
to
heck
school?
knows?
Well, so we're here to talk about the new Asus laptop. The big deal with
Yes.
this, to me at least, is that it has AMD's new upgraded. What do they call these? Is it Rembrandt or is it? I can't
Yeah,
even keep.
Rembrandt. It's the Zen 3 Plus, if you want to get super technical, but the
Yeah,
former code name Rembrandt, Zen 3 Plus architecture.
yeah. And the previous
And
generation
yeah,
was called, was that Cezanne or
it's Cezanne and Van Gogh. There were different versions
yeah,
of it,
Van
but
Gogh was the Steam Deck, right?
yeah,
I think. Yeah, so
and
Cezanne was
right,
kind of interesting because it was like a decent processor, but it was still married to Vega 8 graphics.
right,
And they skipped over RDNA completely for the laptops, and now this is RDNA 2. So that's like a big upgrade, and I was particularly excited to see like what this could do in terms of gaming performance. I mean, we know the Steam Deck has 8 compute units. This has 12.
right.
And it's a bigger form factor. So I'm like, excellent. We might be getting integrated graphics that don't suck.
I mean,
Z-
yeah, it is a very
Go ahead.
thin laptop, right? It's like cooling. I think was something in the review. You'll find that you sort of have to, get your expectations a bit ready about it. It's a single fan design. It's this thing is very thin, so
Yeah, it's like just
we'll
over
we'll
half an inch.
yeah. So we will get to that, and yeah, it has the ports to match with two USB Cs and a headphone jack on one side, and just USB C on the other. So yeah,
Yeah,
it's
that
you.
that's kind of my biggest complaint. I'm like, what? No USB A? I still have a
Oh wait,
ton
wait,
of
wait,
A
wait.
peripherals.
It comes with this dongle. You get it, USB C on one side, USB A on the other. So I suppose you could do that. But yeah, it's absolutely living the dongle life. But yeah,
It doesn't have it doesn't come with dongles for HDMI or DisplayPort though, right?
nope, this is the dongle type C to
Yeah.
type A.
So if you
Um,
want video output, you need to buy an extra dongle.
yeah, it's 0.59 inches thick. It's interesting. It's like the Steam Deck is a little chunkier. So that might be a form factor we will see a little better suited for gaming. And to be fair, this is not necessarily marketed as a gaming laptop, but it does have the chip and it does have those RDNA 2 cores.
Yeah, it's always interesting with laptops. Like, this has basically the best integrated graphics we've seen ever, I think. I mean, maybe there's something that was a little better, but for Windows laptops at least, I mean, MacBooks have their special integrated graphics that's different and faster and but also very different. Yeah, so let me quick show. We'll pull up the spec sheet here.
Sure.
So OLED screen. It's a still a oh no, it's like a funky resolution, not funky, but it's a 16:10 aspect ratio, which
Right.
I have an exclamation point for the 10. 2880 by 1800. So it's basically
So
like your
yeah,
what is that?
Asus
What's that
refers to
code?
it as Asus refers to it as a 2.8K display, which is I see a lot of things like that, like 2560 by 1440 called 2.5K.
Yeah,
So it's it's what they were able to get with an OLED panel. So you get a decently high resolution, not 4K, but a decently resolution OLED panel for I will say a pretty decent price.
yeah. I mean, $1,500. It's not cheap, but I mean, it's not bad either for everything that you get. Let's see other specs. Ryzen 7 6800U. That's an 8-core 16-thread processor, right?
Yes.
And the Zen 3 Plus, I believe the only real change with the plus sign, right, is that it supports DDR5 instead of DDR4. So, that means more bandwidth for your
Right.
integrated graphics and other stuff. And DDR5, I think, uses a bit less power than LPDDR4. So,
Yeah.
a couple of nice little upgrades. The big one to me, though, is that Radeon 680M integrated graphics. 12 compute
Right.
units. I don't know what the clock speeds are off the top of my head. I actually probably have that open on AMD's page. Does it say? Let's see. I don't see clock speeds at all for the graphics. Oh no, graphics frequency 2200 megahertz. So that is actually, that's a pretty stinking fast graphics solution when you get right down to it.
Yeah.
And we'll see that later when we get to like some of the benchmarks. But
Yes.
let's see, other things. Everything else is pretty typical stuff. I mean, it does have DDR5 6400, which is kind of like your fastest in spec DDR5 right now. Big battery for such a small, thin laptop, 67 watt hour.
It's a very thin battery. So I think we have a picture later of it open. But
yeah, we'll get to the pictures.
You get this thin battery that's spread over a lot of it, and then a very small motherboard. One thing I do want to mention on here is the pricing, which is on AMD has given us the price around $14.99. Asus is a little more cagey on availability. Like it's considered like Q3 availability. It was a little less sure about it, but AMD was pretty sure. Like this one is $14.99. And it'll start closer to like $10.99 with lower specs, like Ryzen 5, for instance.
Yeah, that'll be interesting to see what the Ryzen 5 on the Rembrandt processors does, because often with like when you're sticking CPUs and GPUs into a 15-watt package, you basically run into power limits more than processor compute limits. You can't sustain maximum speeds with all 12 CUs and all 8 cores running rampant. So that could be a nice way to save a few $100s and maybe not lose too much performance. Anything else we want to talk about specs, or shall we go on to our pictures?
I'm sure we can go through the pictures of it. I think that'll.
Yeah.
I think this is a very pretty laptop. That's it. Obviously from above, I think Asus has done a nice little redesign of the Zenbook. It's very thin, very professional looking, very clean. I like the little right adjusted Star Trek A they've got going on. They've been doing that for a bit. Like, I just like, and I like that they call this color Ponder Blue.
Ponder.
It's kind of gray. There are other colors on Asus's website, but I don't know if there's where each color will be available. But I like it. It's in that like you can get a fun color, but it's still pretty subdued. So
I get tired of the same color laptops after year. Yeah. I'm like, for a while I really liked the grayish black, gunmetal, whatever color, and then I got bored with that. So I do like the blue ones, and white is also sometimes a nice change of pace.
So I like this thing. It's very light. It's made of like a magnesium aluminum alloy. So there's like a bit of like a sort of, to me that always feels a little plasticky.
Yeah.
So if you're like I really like that like solid aluminum feel of a MacBook, but I kind of get why they went with this here because it made it real, and like it makes it real light as opposed to like an XPS.
Yeah, there's a shot of it opened up.
Yep. Yes.
OLED screen, which you can see perfectly on our live stream.
Yes, you have the OLED screen. And we get to the benchmark. For me, it was like plenty bright in my use. As we get to it, you'll see that there are other OLEDs, and again, like they might be in different resolutions that we found to be a little brighter, a little more vivid. But like to my eye, it really looks plenty bright and plenty colorful. So I do like that.
The keyboard,
and
it comes touchpad lights up.
Yeah, so the touchpad lights up. I've always thought this thing, their number pad, now I have it on here also. I think it's a bit of a gimmick. You can do it. You can also summon the calculator from it. I guess if you're really into Excel and in a pinch, you could do this, but I don't know why you wouldn't just use the number keys. It doesn't make, so I tend to leave that off.
Yeah, I've tried it, and like I like my 10 key on my desktop keyboard, but like as a 10 key touch typist, like I can't do it on the number pad because there's no like there's no reference point. It's just a flat, smooth surface. And so you have to actually look at it. And at that point, I'm like, I could just type up on the keys above.
So yeah, I get what they go for there, and I'm sure there must be someone who appreciates it because they keep putting that tech in every year. But for me, that's whatever. The keyboard's pretty nice. You got 1.4 millimeters of travel. It makes like a surprisingly decent like tactile sound, which you probably can't hear through my headphones, but it feels decent. And if you like that clicky sound, then I think you'll like this. It's obviously doesn't feel like some sort of mechanical keyboard, but it's definitely good enough. You get that little bump, which I like. And this touchpad is pretty spacious for something so small.
Yeah, the bigger touchpads have become commonplace. I think Apple kind of started that. They started saying, you know what, we don't need the little rinky-dink touchpad. Let's see what else. Ports.
So
there you can
so
see.
so as we said, ports on the sides, you don't get a lot. There's 2 of your USB 4 ports and the headphone jack, and on the other side has a single USB-C, another USB-C, which I believe will support USB 4 with the driver update. I will point out, and this might be super nerdy, but I look at a lot of laptops and I love the hinge design on this thing. Like you get this like shiny, it's like a little more pop of color than the rest of it. And I think it's like you get this like cool little mechanical look compared to like that's sort of like metallic compared to the rest of the laptop. Maybe that's really
Hopefully
like
it's
nerding out.
durable too. Like laptops,
Yeah.
hinges are the biggest failure point, I think.
Yeah. And so this one goes 180. And as Asus usually does, they actually have a bit of the display goes below the hinge, and that lifts things up. They call it ergo lift, and it lifts up it lifts the keyboard up a little bit to an angle, which I don't think is a huge deal for comfort, but some people I know really like it.
Honestly, I don't think it has as much to do with comfort as lifting the vents off the
Oh,
ground a little bit.
it definitely helps there. They do a similar thing on like there's Zenbook Duos and some of their gaming stuff, and there they absolutely position that, but that's usually at a bit more of an extreme angle.
Let's see what else we got. And here's our bottom shot.
Right. So this is it open, and I will say that typically when you get a laptop like this, I don't consider this to be something that most people could open because you have screws along the outside of the bottom, but it ends up there's also screws under the feet, these back 2 feet. In this case, they kind of came off easy, so I took them off. But I think for the average person, that's like if you already have screws along the outside, I don't know what you're trying to hide by putting more of them in here. And not everyone will be able to take these feet clean off, and that kind of makes this less upgradable. If you rip the feet off,
then you have to figure out how to fix them, stick them back on.
Right, and these aren't like circular feet that you could buy on Amazon. So I don't love that, but if you do get in and you're careful, and hopefully you have enough adhesive to put it back on, you get in here. There is a little you can do. The SSD is replaceable, so I guess if your SSD goes bad or you need more space, you could open it up for repair. The network card similarly is in there. The LPDDR5 RAM is soldered, so that's not an option. But the battery here, you can see also connected. You could replace it if you needed to. The other thing to note in here is that single fan. I mean, that's not uncommon in laptops of this size to be cooled by one fan with the heat pipe. But
and it's a 15-watt part, so people are going to be like, yeah, should be fine.
But yes, it should be fine. But if you do want to use it for something like gaming, that gets tough. And I think as people see it and try it, though, that's where they might come up across some limits.
Yeah. Battery, is it like glued on or anything, or does it just come out pretty easily? Do you know?
We didn't take this one out. The connector's in there. They're not usually glued in. Sometimes they're held in with screws.
Yeah.
In the PC world, but this one we haven't removed the battery here, but I'm pretty sure it can be removed.
Yeah, I think Apple's the one who usually like glues everything down, and it's super hard to take them apart.
Apple's design involves like the multi-cells connected together. That's less common. I think Microsoft has done it a few times also, but that's a little less common here. This one hasn't been removed, so couldn't tell you for sure.
Yeah. And one of the things I think is pretty cool is like just look at how small the motherboard and processing area is. Like it's bigger than a phone, right? But it's not that much bigger. and so, all that integration, your modern SoCs have just everything. So it's just like power circuitry and your memory, and then your storage slot and network
Yeah,
slots.
I was really impressed to see how much real estate they could fill with the battery here. I mean, obviously 67 watt hours is giant, but by making the battery thinner and taking up more room, they can put it in there. And as we might see a little later, this lasted a long time on our battery test. We have seen some of those thinner motherboards before. I mean, obviously, if you saw the very few Intel Lakefield designs,
Yeah.
those are all super tiny. Apple's had really small motherboards on its M1 MacBooks, but clearly with x86, it can be done. I mean, obviously, you lose something like repairability, which maybe people don't care about so much for an ultrabook like this one, but
Yeah.
that's why you can't. Like, if you had a gaming machine, that might be a problem to some, but for this, you can get it down pretty small. I'm absolutely impressed by the size of the PCB here.
Yeah. Let's see. Comment from Michael Annis. My children have used Dell laptops for college, and the hinge fails prematurely out of warranty and makes it useless. Yeah, I've had like family members. That's almost always where it goes bad, and it's happened on just about everything from Asus to HP to Dell to even Lenovo's. I've seen hinges fail. It's just one of those where if you open and close it a lot, the hinge will
I've only
usually
ever
give
seen
out.
I've only ever seen one hinge ever fail, but to be fair, that was a guy who lived across from me in college, and he would fall asleep with his laptop on like on his lap and just in his bed, just go to bed, and then one day he woke up and it landed on the corner, and that was it.
Oh, yep.
And he got it recovered under warranty
Oh,
somehow.
good.
But
So that takes care of the initial overview
yeah,
um, of the laptop itself. Let's go ahead and hit the
let's talk about some
benchmarks,
performance
right?
numbers.
Battery test. This is, I mean, it's a laptop, so battery life matters.
Yes, it's a laptop. It's a thin portable laptop. You're going to be taking places. The last few generations of Ryzen have really done well. We including on some of the gaming laptops, it's outperformed. So I wasn't super surprised to see this here. Lasted 11 hours and 2 minutes on average between the two runs we did. And what's interesting about this is that it did so well with a high resolution OLED screen, and it still lasted 11 hours. So for those who aren't aware or haven't read the review yet, and if you haven't, you should. But our battery test, it runs at 150 nits, and it browses the web, it streams video, it runs OpenGL benchmarks, and just does this on a loop while connected over Wi-Fi. And it just goes over and over again. And typically, I consider at a minimum like 8 hours to be good. Like 8 hours is enough to get you through a workday. And obviously, we can talk about how battery tests run and what's the best battery test, and people aren't going to use it straight. But 11 hours straight is pretty good.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm sure if you fire up a game or do something super CPU intensive, that'll cut down the battery life a lot. But still,
Right.
if you're just using it as a normal office home machine,
Yeah.
like 11
if you're
hours gets you through the whole day and then some for most people.
Yeah, if you're a person who keeps at a reasonable amount of brightness, look, if you have your OLED screen pumped, it's not going to last 11 hours. It's not how it's going to work. But yeah, you do email and spreadsheets and Word documents, and maybe you're watching YouTube and listening to music, you should be good here. I mean, Apple's MacBook Pro, we didn't have an M1 Air in ours, so we went with the Pro, which is in price actually a little more similar. That's still like the champion here at 1632. And you can see improvements. The Lenovo IdeaPad Slim 7 Carbon was a model from last year with the 5800U. So this went a little longer than that one. That also had an OLED screen. That Lenovo Yoga 9i Gen 7, that's an Alder Lake P series. It's the i7 1260p. And that one lasted a little over 8 hours, which I still think is good, but I mean, it's not 11 hours.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, like I have a laptop that's probably 7 years old now, and it was from a Dell. It's a XPS 15, one of those old models, but the battery actually life was 9 hours at launch because they had like a 97 watt hour battery. That
Yeah.
will go down over time, so I still get like 3 or 4 hours of useful time out of it, but something to keep in mind. What it is new is not what it's going to be
Yeah.
4 years down the road.
Yeah, I mean, that's just how batteries work, though.
Yep. Cinebench. This is our scaling over time test to basically see if the system throttles, and most laptops do, especially ultrabooks.
Yeah, usually what you see is that first run is indeed the first run. Like, we're not throwing out any that shows it. Like, if you were to burst immediately, what would you get? And so you're getting like a pretty darn high score of like over 10,000 there. And then it sort of started to droop a bit into like over time into the low 8,000s. This run took about half an hour, which is pretty good for this. I've seen ultra like that. I love this because that makes this test shorter for me to run. I've seen them go over an hour before.
You're
But
saying
yeah,
half hour per run?
no, I mean across the 20. So
Okay, I
Cinebench.
was gonna say, I was like, wait, that's a
So
long time.
yeah, no. So Cinebench R23, the way it runs, they changed it from R20. R20 was a single run. Oh, okay, we're gonna like make this image and we're gonna be done. R23 runs it over and over again. So we have a script to make R23 a bit more like R20, where it does it once, collects the score, and then moves on to the next one. So what we're doing is we're using R20 as it was, like basically the R20 framework of run it again, get individual scores, but with the image with the rendering from R23. And so that's how you get these scores. And sometimes they even out a little more a little earlier. I think this is where the single fan might hurt it. I mean, how many people are going to be doing something like Cinebench R23 on a laptop like this? Probably not a ton, but it does show that if you do decide to do something that requires that bursty workload, it's not going to burst that long over time, probably because of that cooling.
Yeah, and one of the things to keep in mind too is like this also could represent like a gaming workload pretty decently. Like as the chip gets hotter, the system gets hotter, you'll probably lose a good 15 to 20% in terms of maximum performance, which doesn't mean it's unplayable, but it just keep in mind that your initial performance in games is probably going to be better than what you get 10 minutes later as it settles into a, steady state heat temperature level.
Right.
Let's see. File transfer test.
Sure. So, I mean, the file transfer test always depends on a whole lot of factors, and that includes what drive what drive they use, things like that. So here we happen to get a pretty darn high file transfer rate. I hope they're using this SSD a lot, and that can actually change depending on when you buy a laptop. But we had our 25 gigabyte test files at 1,543 megabytes per second.
You know what SSD that is? What they put in this one?
Let me remind myself real quick since I have it here. But you'll see the Lenovo is also using a pretty fast one with the 9i Gen 7. And this one is using, this one's using a Samsung. I don't have I can look that model number up.
Probably their consumer, or not consumer, their OEM variant of the 980, I would assume. Not the 980 Pro, maybe. But yeah, I mean, it looks like a pretty.
Yeah, it appears to be like an OEM version of it.
Yeah, I was laughing because Andrew and I were running some tests earlier to get our gaming benchmarks, and I have a laptop that has an Intel P660 1 terabyte drive, and I tell you, those QLC drives, they can be awful. Like it would burst at like 700 megabytes per second for about 5 seconds, maybe 10 seconds, and then it would drop to like the steady state copying Red Dead Redemption 2 over to it, drop to like 90 megabytes per second. I'm like, this is slower than some hard drives.
Right.
That's why I don't like QLC.
Now there is obviously the question here, like 25 gigabytes is a lot. How will other things compare? But this did admirably here.
Yeah. Let's see. Geekbench.
So I thought this was perhaps the most interesting test, and I know you have opinions about Geekbench, and everyone has opinions about Geekbench. But what you saw here, I think, was AMD's best shot at competing with Apple's ARM architecture thus far. In that, okay, the Asus was a little lower on single core, but on the multi-core test, it outperformed, or frankly, I would say like they were about even given how Geekbench works. And then here you saw that the Alder Lake P series was also better on single core, like really in the range. Fell a little bit short on multi-core. Like I'd say they're both pretty good in there. And then with the Slim 7 Carbon, you see that the single core didn't seem to be like a huge jump from 5000 series to 6000 series, but you did get a nice bump in multi-core performance with this.
Yeah.
So the video transcoding test, we use Handbrake. For video transcoding, we have a 4K video. We take 1080p and we see how long does it take to do. The Zenbook did it in 815, and which was faster than last year's chip at 851. The MacBook still the fastest is 744, and that Alder Lake one really fell behind by several extra minutes there.
Yeah, that's interesting. That one,
Interesting.
you wonder if something was misconfigured or whatever, because I would have thought Alder Lake would have been more competitive in that particular test.
Yeah.
But then I guess the Alder Lake was is that a 4P core variant? I'm trying to remember which chip that is.
Core
Is
i7
it 6 core or 4 core? Yeah.
1260p. And that one has 4 performance cores and 8 efficiency cores.
Okay, maybe that makes sense. It's tough to say. Like when you start getting those unbalanced cores, you're like, wait, how much does each one matter? Anyway,
right.
And then finally,
here's our display measurements. Yeah. So the display, I think I said this before. It's an OLED display, and to me, it looks nice. Like I've used it plenty. I've watched plenty of videos and like TV on it, and you can get better OLED. Both those bottom two Lenovo's, the AMD from last year and the Yoga 9i from this year, both use OLED, and based on the numbers, probably pretty similar panels. This one was a bit dimmer. Didn't cover quite as much of either the sRGB or the DCI-P3 color gamut. But if you're not using this for creative work, I think you're going to be fine. Like I do think it looks pretty nice. It gets pretty bright. Apple's MacBook Pro 13 got a lot brighter. That's not an OLED screen, however, that's just their standard LCD.
Yep. All right, so that takes care of the CPU performance. I just want to put in a disclaimer before we get to the graphics performance. Andrew and I had to run graphics tests today because our testing lab didn't get those done for we don't.
Yeah, I mean,
this isn't a gaming laptop, basically.
Yeah, we didn't run a ton of the gaming tests initially, and also we had a tight embargo. We fit it in, and I hope that we can get these ones back into the review now that we have them. But they're making their debut on the show.
Yes, and the caveat I'm going to add is I basically used the only 2 laptops I have available, and they're not like the best representatives necessarily. So one is an Ice Lake laptop 10th gen with Nvidia's MX330 discrete graphics coupled onto it, and that's that's pretty old and slow as far as even the MX series goes. Like the MX450, I think doubled the number of cores. Then on the other one, it's a Tiger Lake 10th gen. It is the 96 EU variant, so that's pretty comparable to what you get with Alder Lake. The only real difference is going to be in terms of power levels. So this is a 15 watt Tiger Lake. So those disclaimers out of the way, there's a lot of other laptop GPUs out there that we could compare with. Again, this is integrated versus previous gen Ice Lake integrated. And we tested at 1080p medium, which honestly for a laptop of this level, I would probably be looking at 1360 or even 1280 by 720 just to offload some of the work from the discrete graphics. And that's what the Steam Deck does, right? It runs at a 1280 by 720 display, and so that boosts performance.
It's close. It's got a 1280 by 800 display.
That's right. It's
with the Cassette 2S is the new 16 by 10 aspect ratio.
Right. So anyway, that said, overall, the 3 games we tested, which we'll get to the individual results in a second, you can see the Iris Xe and the MX330. 330 are both pretty similar in that 17 FPS range. There's certain games that favored the Iris over the Nvidia. Specifically, Red Dead Redemption 2 didn't like only having 2 GB of memory VRAM, but you're almost twice as fast with the AMD's 680M. So, 1080p medium settings maybe still a bit of a stretch depending on the games, but you're getting very close to the 30 frames per second mark. You could tweak a few settings, or you could just drop your resolution to 1600 by 900 and probably get there. Borderlands 3, relatively popular game still, has built-in benchmark. It breaks 30 frames per second. Minimums still fall into that 22 frames per second range. It's playable, but it's not going to be ideal unless you drop the resolution. You got in? Did you?
I mean, this one was probably its best showing. AMD, AMD promoted game, but I would absolutely want to drop it a little bit, because 31, like I do consider 30 my playable, but when I see something, it's 31.7, I'm like, oh, well, there was definitely several frames below there, that were below 30.
Yeah.
So which kind of matches up with the Steam Deck performance I've seen.
Yep. Red Dead Redemption 2, this uses the Vulkan API is what we tested with.
Yep.
Pretty heavy in terms of like both CPU and GPU. So, this was one where the MX330 from Nvidia, it only has 2 GB of memory. And so like you actually have to manually edit your settings file to get to the 1080p medium settings we used. And that probably is what dropped it. Otherwise, it was like trying to tell me, oh, you can only run at 1280 by 720 in low quality, or you exceed the VRAM. And I was like, yeah, forget that. So
yeah, this is an interesting test, because when we agreed to do it on medium, because we typically use medium on our laptop and desktop reviews for machines with discrete graphics, because this game is so difficult that even like the high end stuff, especially when you get into like 4K, never can still struggle at running it at higher settings. So running this on medium was kind of a trip to see it running at all. And I can't say I'm surprised to see it at 27, but you could get it there. I absolutely believe you could get it there.
Yeah, just drop resolution 1600 by 900, and that would get you your 30 frames per second, I bet. And then the last game we did was the ultimate, the one that's been around forever, Shadow of the Tomb Raider.
Yeah, and I mean this one again, like just missed the 30. You turn that down to low or change the resolution, do things like that, you could probably get it there. As you can see, definitely almost doubled what was the Ice Lake Iris XE, or was this the?
Yeah.
No,
sorry. The Ice Lake is with the MX330.
Okay, so the Tiger Lake Iris XE.
Yes.
So
that's basically Intel's more or less current best integrated graphics. Like Alder Lake P series and U series, I think they still max out at 96. They call them vector engines now, but they're basically the execution units.
Yeah. So wasn't playable at medium, but I'm sure it would be playable at low, having seen the Steam Deck, having tried this on the Steam Deck before, and still a pretty potent showing, I think.
You could probably run at 720p and turn on ray tracing.
I did not try that.
Which Shadow of the Tomb Raider was like, it was one of those first gen ray tracing games.
Yes.
And the ray tracing is one of those where I just kind of roll my eyes at, because it's only for shadows, play off of the Shadow of the Tomb Raider. And there are situations, like if you run the benchmark without ray tracing, there's situations where the shadows look good, but then like you pass a certain distance and the game swaps to worse shadowing. No, without ray tracing. So it's like, without ray tracing, the shadows can look good, but the engine keeps swapping back and forth. So sometimes you'll see like the shadows will all of a sudden go from a soft edge to hard edge and then back. And you're like, wait, why did it do that? Well, because they defined some arbitrary distance that said, if you're past 10 feet, don't use soft shadows. And sometimes that shows up. Whereas the ray tracing is like, always do the nice looking shadows, but it doesn't.
Well, just to be clear, don't ray trace on this. If you get one, don't do it. You're not going to have a good time. I haven't gotten into too many other games like this, but I suspect that the games I thought ran like the absolute best on the Steam Deck, games like that were either CPU dependent, like Civ 6, or games that are sort of like 2D roguelikes, things like Dead Cells. I think you'll probably have an excellent time on this, especially because you're not going to take advantage of the 2880 by 1800 display, but those types of games, I think we've hit a point in integrated graphics, especially on the AMD side, where you can really play them without thinking too hard.
Yeah, so it bodes well for AMD. Like, this is their Zen 3 Plus architecture. Zen 4 will be coming out sometime later this year.
Yes.
And there's what's the next one called? I'm trying to remember. After Rembrandt, we get the next one is supposed to be Zen 4 with RDNA 3 integrated graphics, and that will certainly be interesting to see where that goes. Like, there's already rumors of 16 compute units, and RDNA 3 will presumably be better than RDNA 2. So
I would hope so.
We could actually see integrated graphics that's, you could legitimately play with ray tracing in games like Cyberpunk 2077. We'll find out, I guess, later this year, early next year.
Yeah, I'd be very curious. That is one thing you sort of mentioned, the idea of like that's coming later this year, because this one's currently listed for a sort of vague Q3. So one thing, and I think this isn't specific to this laptop or to AMD, I've seen this with a lot of laptops, is how much time there's going to be between generations. By the time you can get your hands on this one, is Zen 4 going to be here? And I don't know the answer to that.
I don't think so. I think Zen, I don't know yet. Maybe Paul or someone else has
Zen 4 may very well come to desktops first and then go to laptops next, which is so. But I will say, so this one's not here yet. But yeah, this is sort of, I would have never, even like, I think like 4 or 5 years ago, I wouldn't have thought that you'd be able to get something like MacBook Air thin, like pull out of the manila envelope thin, that you could reliably, lightly play games on. Again, the cooling is not great for it. This is clearly not this is not like an ROG laptop. It's a Zenbook for a reason. But that's really impressive technology. The other thing about it, which I don't think we mentioned earlier because I didn't have a specific chart for it, is that for gaming, I would worry about the heat because this ran warm just sort of regularly using it. You got the single fan design, but just like touching it using the keyboard, it wasn't like so much that I was going to like pull my hands away. Like I wasn't touching the stove, but more than some other laptops, even on the touchpad a bit, like I felt that the chassis was getting warm. And that's a tough thing, but with the single fan design, but clearly this is putting out a lot of heat to achieve those levels of power, but then you have to make sure that it keeps nice and cool on the outside. So again, like it's not so bad like you couldn't use it, but it does get nice and toasty when you have like enough tabs open and you're multitasking enough.
That's kind of one where I almost sometimes feel laptops have gotten too thin. Like I'm of that mindset where I'm like, you know what? If it weighed a quarter of a pound more and were like 0.1 or 0.2 inches thicker and just cooled a little better, I would be totally okay with that. Like this competition to kind of see who can make the thinnest laptop. At some point, you're like, actually, that's too thin. If you made your keyboard flat and no key travel, that would be awful. I wouldn't like it. So
yeah, this one it does have key travel. It is thin, but to get this thin, what a lot of manufacturers have done are the single fan designs, things like that. And look, some of it is probably down to materials and so many other aspects. But that was something I noticed when using it. I was never like, oh, this is something that's like so bad. I'm not burning myself, but it is something that does affect day-to-day usability a little bit.
Yeah, I've had laptops in the past, that light gaming laptops, where I had an Acer, I think it might have been, that had like it was either an RTX 20 series or something of that. Maybe it was a GTX 10 series, but the surfaces of that laptop could get into the like 70 degrees range, 70 Celsius range. and like the worst spot was like I think ADC, and I'm like that was way too much for me.
Okay, yeah. So this one on the keyboard, on the when I ran the Cinebench test is when I took our measurements. So we kind of take them like under load, like how bad will this reasonably get? It was just under 50 Celsius at the center of the keyboard, which is a little warmer than we see in others. I don't think it's sort of the deal breaker.
No, it's not horrible. It's just it would be uncomfortable if
Oh,
you were
sorry, but I
resting your
said 50.
hands
It was
there.
more. Sorry, it was more like 50. Sorry, it was 50 was the bottom. It was more like 40 to the center of the keyboard, and then 50 here. And then, but like the touchpads, funny, the touchpads don't usually heat up at all. But like this warmed up to like 32.8 when like it's about 91 degrees Fahrenheit when they're usually like those usually stay in like the 70 to 80 degrees Fahrenheit range.
Yeah, because
So
you've got the batteries only thing underneath there, and the batteries might get a little warm if you're charging, but that's about it.
yeah, we did run it plugged in, but so it does get a little warm, but I mean that is sort of one of the trade-offs you do occasionally make with something so small.
So let's talk about like the wider laptop market. I mean, this isn't strictly like this isn't designed as a gaming laptop. It's designed as an ultrabook. Where do you rank this? We gave it like 4 out of 5, but
we gave it
like
4 out of 5. Yeah.
What's better than this in your book?
So that's an interesting question. This one, well, first of all, I would definitely want to see where this sort of ends up falling in the market, like when it comes out. Right now, one of my favorites that we reviewed, and we did compare it, was that Lenovo Yoga 9i Gen 7. That's a 14-inch laptop. It also has the option for an OLED hinge. The performance on that laptop wasn't as good as this one. But that one also had like a really slim design. It felt a little more premium. The sound was amazing. And you get Thunderbolt 4, which I guess you don't technically hear. That one's also a little more expensive, however, at $1,449 to start, and like $1,929 is tested when we reviewed it. But I think right now that one definitely stands out. There are a couple other things that I'm really looking forward to us getting in that I think might be serious competitors to laptops like this. I'm very curious to see that Dell XPS 13 Plus whenever that shows up. We haven't gotten to test that yet, though it started selling. That's the one where they got rid of the function keys, but they're using the Intel P series. And on the Intel U series side, just today, HP announced its new HP Spectres, the 13.5 and the 16-inch model. I've been a fan of the previous HP Spectre 13s, and last year the 14. This 13.5 kind of falls in the middle. So I'd be very curious to see how that works, because in that case you're getting something thinner, because I'm not really sure AMD has like a straight answer to U versus P series the way Intel's gone in here. So I'm curious to see how those U series laptops sort of end up working out in something like the Spectre. And so that's where you get sort of the ultra portable market right now. Otherwise, the Zenbook's really nice. I haven't seen a ton of other. I'd love to be able to say, oh, these are the other AMD laptops that I would recommend, but we haven't seen a ton in Ryzen 6000 yet. And
are there any announced?
I believe there have been some announced off the top of my head. I don't remember.
Like, well, I guess I
which
should
ones
say,
there have been like
sale.
Are any for sale?
None of these are on sale yet, right?
I don't believe they're for sale yet. I mean, this one's not for sale yet. This is the one that was sent out for testing. So not for sale yet. There are a handful, I believe, announced, though. There have been so many laptops announced this week that I couldn't remind you what runs what. I believe some of the HP Envy, at least one of the HP Envies was announced today, will be running on Ryzen 6000. So there will be some options. I mean, it sounds to me from speaking with a number of vendors that there's still some factory backlog, especially in China, where many of these are built and where there have been some recent COVID lockdowns. So we're still kind of in a space where you can get what you get. There have been a lot of things, I think, announced even as early as CES this year that haven't launched in like full force, or they're producing what they can. So of what we've tested recently, I do like that Yoga 9i Gen 4 if you prefer a 2-in-1. And you want something a little more like aluminum premium feeling, but you do have to be willing to pay for that. And it is a little more money.
So that, any other final thoughts on laptops? We could talk. We've got a few more minutes. I just updated our GPU pricing guide. GPU
Yes.
prices, as we've discussed recently, like they continue this downward climb, downward ride. So that's nice to see. I was surprised, like some of the GPUs have fallen almost 30% since the beginning of April, which is, again, they were way overpriced, but you can tell, like I was looking at eBay prices, and one of the interesting things there is cards like the 3080, the average price might be like $850 on eBay, right? But
Right.
that's the average. And there are now cards on eBay. Usually they go on auctions where the sold price ends up below $700. I always wonder, I'm like, it's hard to tell, was that actually shipped and paid for and received, or
Or did
but
somebody like, yeah.
scam or back out? Because I know, like
When you're
I've had
looking,
things.
you're exclusively looking at sold completed auctions, correct?
Yes,
Okay.
but I still, like, it says it's sold and completed, but I don't know if that actually means, hey, this
Yeah.
person paid $700 and actually received the working GPU, because it's eBay and people do do shady stuff all the times. Like someone puts up an auction and they go, "Oh, the highest bid was $700. That's not enough," so they
Rick, yeah,
just cancel it.
I'm curious, since we're talking GPUs for the last few minutes. Obviously you're tracking the prices, and now there's rumors of, like, serious rumors, like, where there's smoke kind of rumors of the potential launch of the RTX 40 series sometime later this year. Do you think that might push current gen cards below MSRP?
It ought to, but I mean, like, Nvidia is usually pretty good about clearing out inventory before the new stuff arrives because
Right.
they don't want to compete with themselves, kind of thing.
Right.
And that's the question, is like, will you have some excess cards? Because with the shortages of the past year and a half, and then all of a sudden mining dies, and maybe we get a glut of cards, and maybe we actually see some cards sold for a little while at less than MSRP. Realistically, the 40 series is going to offer more performance, and it will come in at the top of the spectrum. So, they're not going to replace the 3050 or the 3060 anytime soon.
Right.
Which
They'll start with
means,
the 4080, 4070,
yeah,
maybe the 4090.
yeah. So your 3090 Ti it's going to have a very short life at the top of the totem pole, and then I don't think they'll launch with the 4090 Ti. The rumors are saying 4090 with 126 SMs, streaming multiprocessors, out of a potential 144. That's again what the rumors and leaks are saying. Take
Right.
those with a dose of skepticism. If that's correct, that
Just
leaves,
sprinkling some salt all over
yes.
those rumors.
If that's correct, though, it does leave plenty of room for Nvidia to come back and say in 9 months or 6 months or whatever, hey, here's the new 4090 Ti with 140 SMs, or even
Right.
144 SMs if they get enough perfectly working silicon back. So we'll see. I've always said, I thought that the launch date would be around September, just because that coincides with back to school, and that's NVIDIA's often done that September window in the past.
Right.
But there are
And
credible rumors
for all of you
saying,
students going back to school,
yeah,
make sure you're gaming.
yeah. So there are credible rumors now coming out saying we could see this as early as July. Some are saying June, but like we're saying, I've heard early Q3, which means July. It doesn't mean June. I think June is not happening by any stretch, but we'll see.
I
Maybe they'll
mean,
prove
June
me
is still
wrong.
technically Q2 if
Yeah.
we're being
So
pedantic about it.
the interesting thing is, and I saw this on, I think it was Video Cards tweeted, or maybe it was WCCF Tech, but one of them, they took some pictures that had come out and they said, hey, look, here's the 3090 versus the 4090.
Right.
And they showed that there was actually an extra fin on the 4090, and people were like, oh, that's so stupid. I'm like, no, but it's important because it proves that there are different designs and are different cards.
Right.
And if we're seeing images leaked of the coolers, well, when the 3080 and 3090 cards were leaking images right before launch. I want to say it
Right.
was about 2 months before the cards showed up was when we
Yeah.
first saw images. So if pictures just leaked in May, June, July, middle of July looks like a good target window. And that is when they launched the 3080 Ti and 3070 Ti last year. So it's not out of the question to launch in July. So I'm
You're gonna
hoping.
make me upgrade my power supply, Jared. I have to rebuild the whole thing
Well,
because
the latest rumors say that the 40, I'm not sure if it was 4080 or 4090. I think they said 4090 would be 450 watts, which to me is a lot more sensible. 600 watts seems like that's just too much. I mean, that's crazy town, but it might happen.
wow.
Ruru 2, welcome back to the show. How much inventory do they still have? Betting a lot of the smaller custom PC builders are buying a lot of inventory to put in systems. I mean, this is the question, right? Are they managing to clear it out? And if you look at prices and the newsletters and things that are coming out, you get EVGA. They're like everyone and their dog on the queue from EVGA is getting notifications. Hey, you can buy the card now. It's only $900, and you're like, wait, that was supposed to be a $700 card, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's the same. Like I follow a lot of stock trackers on Twitter, and some of them be like, "Hey, it's around." They might not like you get some like where is this before? Like it's in stock. It might not be MSRP, but it's in stock.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think we're hitting the end of the shortages for the most part, and people
Right.
who really needed to upgrade probably already did so. I think there's a lot of people that aren't in as much of a hurry to upgrade and are willing to wait and see, which it could end up with extra inventory. It all depends on what the system builders and such are seeing. So, I mean, part of me is like, Nvidia, they might not have new cards for sale, but they are definitely going to have used cards hitting the market. I was just looking at that today, I think. Yeah, because NiceHash has announced that they've now unlocked 90% of mining
LHR,
performance on the LHR V3. So the 3080 12 gigabyte and the 3050 were still locked down. And NiceHash has said they've now cracked those, and you're getting 90% of the hashing performance. Well, that's because if you look at your earnings per day, a 3090 Ti can rake in a whopping $2.50 per day after power costs. And that's with cheap power.
Cheap power, which does not exist in our day and age.
Yeah, I only pay 10 cents because I'm in Colorado, northern Colorado. But yeah, so you look at the gains, and 3090 Ti, 3080 Ti, 3090 are all around 225 to 250 a day. 3080s are $2 a day, and you start going, well, yeah, mining's not super profitable. It's summer months in the northern hemisphere. People are going to start thinking seriously about, should I just shut down? Because you don't just pay for the power for the cards if you're a big mining farm. You also got to pay for the power for
Electricity,
the AC. Yeah. And the AC in the summer is brutal.
To cool it, yeah.
So I think, and Paul has said this too, like there's probably going to be a glut of used cards hitting the market very shortly. And you can already see them up on eBay. I was looking the other day, and there were like, what was I think it was 3070. They were selling like lots of 20 cards for like $4,000 or something.
Wow.
I can't remember what it was, but it was, the price was really high. And I was like, whoa, why is that price so high? And then I looked, I was like, oh, it's because they're giving you a whole bunch of cards. I think it was 10 cards for $4,000. So $400 a pop for 3070.
Of course, you have to be careful.
Mining.
Yeah. Of course, yeah, right. You have to be careful when buying any used cards these days. You never know what has happened. Like, has it been run out almost to death before or not?
Yeah, and I mean, I don't know. I think you're probably, if the card works and you clean it and you replace thermal pads and thermal grease, like you're probably okay for gaming purposes. Maybe not continued mining, but yeah, I'd still be, I'd be leery. I wouldn't be jumping at the chance to buy a used mining card.
I guess you got to build that pricing into your risk tolerance into the pricing.
Yeah, I mean, eBay is pretty buyer friendly, so all you have to do is complain and say, nope, I want my money back. So I'm going to send it back. And then, that sucks for the seller, but
or just do what I do and keep playing at 1080p on your 20 series.
That's right. I mean, or you can get the Ryzen 6800U and play at 1080p low quality and still get a good gaming performance. All right, well, I think that about does it. Yeah, Ruru2 also points out Ethereum's like at $2,000 basically now. That's the lowest it's been in a year, more or less. Bitcoin was hovering down around 30,000. So yeah, we'll see if that reverses. You know, maybe graphics card prices stop their free fall and the used cards don't hit the market. But yeah, I'm hopeful that when the 40 series launches, I won't be sitting there saying, "Hey, look, the 4080. It's a great card that you can't buy because they're all sold out." Which is what
the joke we occasionally have internally. So like, oh, like they just released the 3080 and Jared had tested 3 of them, so he's got like 8% of all the 3080s.
Yes, the reviewers had a not insignificant portion of the retail market. The miners had all the other cards. So anyway, hopefully it won't be the best 4080 that you can't buy. That's like fingers crossed. I really hope their supply is good this fall or summer whenever they launched. Anyway, thanks for joining us. As always, like and subscribe. Hit us up with your questions. We're happy to field them. And we'll be back next week. I've got the 6750 XT and 6650 XT reviews should be up by then. And they're in the GPU hierarchy shortly. They're tested. They're just not written up. So we'll see y'all later.